Hello and welcome to the Indie Author Podcast. Today, my guest is Jami Albright. Hey, Jami, how are you doing?
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. To give
Good.
our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, Jami Albright is a born and raised Texas girl and is the Amazon Top 100 author of the Sexy, Swoony, and Pee in Your Pants Funny, Brides on the Run, and the Small Town Royalty series. She's also the co-host, along with Sarah Rosette, of the excellent Wish I'd Known Then podcast, which I can highly recommend as soon as you've caught up on all the back list episodes of the Indie Author Podcast. Definitely go over and start listening to Wish I'd Known Then, because you guys and your guests share some great insights.
Oh, that's
Uh,
great. Thank
I
you for saying so. Yeah.
always learn a lot every time I listen to an episode of that.
Yeah. Sarah and I both got our indie publishing education from podcasts. So we always say that our podcast is a love letter to podcasting and indie publishing because that's how we learned about indie publishing. It was,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's a lovely way to frame it up. I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Very nice. So, Jami, I know, and anyone who listens to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast knows that you know tons and tons about loads and loads of things related to indie publishing. And we had tossed around a couple of topics and we landed on author branding, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is always a great topic to revisit periodically because
Mm-hmm.
I think it is still something that writers don't necessarily think of branding themselves. You know, that's for
Right.
Nike or McDonald's or something.
Right.
But that reminder that no, there's an author brand as well is great. And
Mm-hmm.
so why don't we just start right out
Okay.
with a question about what is branding for an author?
For an author, branding is the promise you make the reader. So if you promise the reader either with your books, like with your cover and your blurb, if you promise them fun, rompy, rom-com, then you need to deliver on that promise. And the same can be said of your brand. I brand myself. Someone told me that some time ago and that I should probably do that just because I do have a pretty strong voice when I write. And so across whatever I wrote, my books are pretty much going to be the same thing. And so my brand is sexy, swoony, pee your pants funny rom-coms. And if that changes, the only way it would change would be it might not be sexy because, if I wrote something that didn't have sex in it, not a romance, but something else, but the rest would still be emotional. They'd still be swoony. They'd still be funny. And so that is my brand. And that is the promise I give my reader. And I try to deliver on that promise every time I write a word on the page.
Well, one thing you're doing for branding, which I think is brilliant, is your name on the wall behind you.
Oh,
Just,
yeah.
people always put their books up and things like that, but having your name like that, I just have to ask, where did you get that?
Etsy. Etsy. I redid my office during 2020. And so I found it on Etsy. And yeah,
Oh, that's
I love it.
fantastic. That would be
Yeah.
a little encouragement for anyone who's been listening to the podcast to hop on over to YouTube and check it out because you have a very cool background and,
Thank you.
one that's both showing your name, but also had some nice elements of, you have
Right.
flowers. But, it's kind of like, you could tell somebody who is writing romance and things like
Yes.
that.
Actually, this is happily ever after, so you can't really read it, but yeah, it
Perfect.
reminds me. Yeah. Yeah. And I have something across from me that says the secret. Hang on. Y'all know I can't see without glasses. I was trying not to put them on. The secret ingredient is always love. And so I try to remember that. I mean, it's just little things to remind me of that when I'm writing. So yeah, this is my brand. This is who I am. And really and truly, it is my name. I mean,
Yeah.
if you encounter Jami Albright in book, speaker, podcast form, you're pretty much going to get the same thing every time. So
And that's nice surrounding yourself with those reminders because it helps you, in the same way that I think sometimes people put something or like listen to music as they're
hmm
writing because it gets them in the mood for what they're
hmm
surround themselves with things that are appropriate for the thing they're writing. Surrounding
yeah,
yourselves with those branding things, I think would help make more concrete that
yes,
commitment that you're making a promise and you need to
right,
deliver on it.
right, right, yeah.
Do you feel like there's a aspect of genre conventions in branding? Because you were saying, you've made a promise to your readers,
hmm
and not
hmm
only is there the sexy, swoony, pee your pants funny aspect, but there's also the sort of underlying expectations about, if you're writing
Yeah,
romance, then there's certain tropes.
right.
To what extent does compliance with conventions of genres overlap with branding?
Oh well, I think so much because there are genre expectations that are for every genre. A sci-fi author needs to have a spaceship. I mean, usually they need to have a captain that's reluctant, and he needs to have probably a broken down spaceship and a very, ragtag crew. But so there are always genre expectations. And so because of that, you want to make sure that your branding is hitting those expectations, because in marketing, it's as important to repel the wrong people as it is to attract the right people. And so because of that, I mean, you can do that with your branding before they even open a book. That's why it's so important to have it right, because if you don't, you might repel the right people. So you want to make sure that you are um, always hitting those expectations in your blurbs, in your covers, in your branding across a series, um, in the interior of your book. Are you giving them a happily ever after, which is a romance genre expectation? Now, I know that there are books and there are readers that don't care about a happily ever after, but for the most part, the majority of romance readers want that happily ever after. If you're writing rom-com, is it funny? Is it really funny? And if you think it's funny, that's great. But do other people think it's funny? If you're writing suspense, is it plot driven along with character driven? And does your branding indicate that it's going to be that kind of suspenseful thriller kind of book? And, if it doesn't, then it's fairly easy to change. You just need to, come up with some ideas.
Well, you're saying that, the idea of appealing to the readers that you should appeal to and
Hmm.
repelling the readers that you don't
Right.
want to. So, what are the ways that an author can investigate who they're
Okay.
reaching,
Yeah.
like de facto who they're reaching, and
Yeah.
then are they reaching the people they think they're reaching, or are they
Right.
looking at that audience and saying, "Oh my god, that's not at all who I thought would be buying my book."
Right, right. Well, one of the easiest ways is covers. I mean, looking at your cover and looking at the covers of the top 25 in your genre. Are your covers matching those covers? And if they are, then you're on the right route to finding those right people. Another good way is to get involved with promos that are genre specific. And if you are getting signups to your, email list or something like that because of your cover, because of your blurb, then that's a good way, because if it's genre specific, you're hitting those people that like what you write. Um, Another is like reader groups that are kind of specific to the genre that you write, being in there, talking with readers, asking questions, polling your readers to see if what you're offering is what they expected when they picked up your book.
It would be interesting if somebody were writing something that was a bit cross genre. I think that's just easier if you're really center. What's the term that Sasha Black uses? Very center of genre.
Yeah.
But if as you get to the edges, let's say you're writing something that is sort of like a rom-com, but also sort of like a murder mystery,
Well,
then
Lizzie Score writes her Riley Thorne books, which they're romances, but they are also mysteries, and
mm,
not like romantic suspense. They're mysteries with romance. So,
yeah, if somebody was, early in their career and they were in that position, it would be interesting to go find some of those beta readers that are very
mhm,
specific to romance or very
mhm,
specific to mystery, and then
mhm.
give them the book and say, at what points is this something that appealed to you or didn't appeal to you, and kind of tally
Where
which
did I
one seemed
land?
stronger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's important. And one of the things that you can do once you kind of settle on what your brand is, even if you are kind of melding genres a little bit, if your brand is specific to that, if you're saying that, you can use that in your advertising. A love story with a mystery. I mean, that is so bad, but you know what I'm saying. Whatever it is, you can use that in your branding so you are reaching those people and you're making people interested. I've never seen that. Let me read the blurb. And then, so it's just a step down and a step as they dig deeper to see if this is who they like, if your book is something they like.
I'm thinking of this in terms of a new writer, but I think it's a good test for people who have more books out there. But if
Hmm.
you're putting your first book out, or even if you have more books, there's the brand you want to be conveying. There's the brand that you actually convey. And then
Yeah.
there's the when you have no idea.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the new writer. They're writing a book. They have no
Hmm.
idea. They don't know where
Hmm.
it's going to be. They don't even
Right.
know what genre to name it. Is
Hmm.
branding important at that point? And if it is, how do they go about defining a brand if they're so early in their career?
I mean, I think it is. For me, I knew what my brand would be. I mean, did I have it narrowed down to sexy, swoony, pee your pants funny? No. But I just understood my voice. Also, I was in a critique group with some really great people, and I know critique groups take a hit sometime because you can get into not great ones, but I was in a great one with really experienced writers who really helped me, and they kind of helped me define my voice and things like that. And so having someone else read it, like a beta reader or something like that, and have them give you feedback. You could also, if you had a beta readers, you could have them write down words that specifically came to mind when they were reading your book. One of the things I say about how to find your brand, if you've already got reviews and stuff, is to go into that word search in your reviews on Amazon and see what keeps coming up, you know, and there could be some words there that you could use in your branding or give you an idea of what other people think your brand is.
Yeah, I
So,
really like that idea of giving the assignment to beta readers to write down a
mhm,
list of
mhm,
words because I think that's a great way to get the most possible value without making it onerous for them.
mhm,
If you
mhm,
have
mhm.
beta readers and you're giving them some assignment like describe your favorite parts of the book and
Yeah,
why, and
yeah,
what you
yeah.
describe at least, then it gets not fun for them. But if
Right.
they can just be dropping in words here and there, and if they do it if they're doing it in a format that would enable them to do this, like highlighting it in an EPUB or, whatever
Mhm.
format you use to give beta readers your work,
Right.
they could, highlight all the words that you liked in green and yellow or something like
Yeah,
that. And
or the
just
parts you like, I
yeah.
mean, Theodore Taylor calls that the butter, in your book that really just gets readers going. They
Yeah.
love, for me, I love A Kiss in the Rain. If I read a book and it's got a kiss in the rain, I'm like, yes. And so it's sort of the same. And I put that in my books because I do love that. And
Mhm.
so knowing what that is, that just, that good stuff that you like when you read a book, whether it's a romance, whether it's a thriller, whether it's sci-fi, whatever it is in those genres that you really love or that the reader really loves, those are the things you want to incorporate in your brand when you're telling other people what it is you write.
Yeah. It is interesting the idea that it's sort of a chicken and egg thing. So you
It
could go
is.
into it knowing
Yeah.
right off the bat, in general, what you wanted your brand to
Mhm.
be,
Mhm.
sexy, swinny, and funny, even if you
Yeah.
haven't framed it up in a
Yeah.
lot of detail. And then I think there are people who are just writing the book of their heart and they have no
Right.
idea.
Right.
And if they decide they think it might be noir, so they decide to join a noir writers group, and then all the noir writers hate it because, in fact, it's a cozy
Yeah.
Agatha Christie mystery or something. It would be hard to I've never thought of branding in this way, of having it be like an intentional thing that you should start out from the beginning, but the coincidence sort of drives it as well.
And I think that's how most people are, I
Mhm.
mean, very few people start out going, okay, this is what I'm going to write, I mean,
Right,
and
right.
very clear, I have a very clear image of branding. I was fortunate because again, I got my education from podcasts. So I listened to a lot of smart people. Also, I held my first book for a year
Mhm.
before I published because I was trying to learn this business. I did not want to just throw a book up. I'd done that before, and I wanted to give my book as good a chance as I could give it for success.
Mhm.
So because of that, I had thought about things like branding, like what is it that I can give the reader that they can't get anywhere else? Or if they could get it someplace else, is it the kind of thing they like when they go to find that kind of thing? And then play that up in everything, in my writing, in my marketing, and everything. But most people, I think they do stumble into it. Or, I mean, honestly, my author tag or whatever was something I saw on a pillow. It wasn't clever, but I felt like I needed something, so I put it on there and put it on my website and stuff. But I think that most people do stumble into it, but that's okay. I mean, you
Mhm.
can change. I mean, you can hone your brand. You can, after a few books or series, you can realize, hey, wait, these all sort of have the same themes. People seem to be saying the same sorts of things about books. And then you can come up with an author brand. You can go back and put it on your website, put it on your cards, put it on your marketing. And yeah, so I think that coming into it, not knowing and letting your readers decide, or not decide, but like getting feedback from them is a great way to come up with your branding. And, most people, because I think most people do that. I think what you said is true that we think our brand is one thing, readers think our brand is another thing, and then there's someplace in between. And that in between is really what you want to hone in on, I think.
Yeah. If someone has started out writing what they think is noir,
Mhm,
and then they start, putting the books up, they look at the reader
mhm.
reviews, say, "This is the coziest noir book I've ever read," and they realize that what they're really writing is cozies, and they have to
Mhm,
rebrand because
mhm.
of that. How big a separation do you feel like they need to make between their work before and after that rebranding? Would you recommend people use a new pen name or just be explicit in their outward
Uh,
facing materials about,
yeah,
a different brand?
I don't think you really have. I mean, I guess it depends on how many books and how many people have read those books. If it were me, I would probably just recover and write new blurbs and change my categories and let them go under the name they're under. Because the fact is that people who've already read them clearly don't like cozies.
Yeah.
And then the people that were reading them aren't gonna read them if they're branded towards a cozy. So, yeah, I would not necessarily do a pen name unless it was something where you'd gone years putting up books and they weren't hitting the mark, but you felt like this set of books would hit, let's say, a cozy market, then maybe yes, have a pen name then. Because, a confused reader is a reader that just moves on. They
Yeah.
don't, there's too many books. They are not going to sit around and try to figure out what it is you have to offer. So, if you had 6 or 7 books and they were all kind of all over the place, or they weren't branded correctly and marketed to the right people, then I think maybe at that point doing a pen name if you knew you had something that was specifically, let's say, cozy, or let's say thriller or something like that.
Yeah. Kind of sounds like Nora Roberts, doesn't she
Hmm.
have I don't know how many different pen names and
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
genres that she's writing in.
Yeah.
And I guess it also depends on whether you're looking at what you're going to do from a certain point out, if you're
Hmm.
continuing to write,
Right.
or if you're wanting to go back and relook at previous works. I would think that you could even subtly change the colors of a cover. I just talked with
Hmm.
Michael around about a rebranding effort he went through, and we were talking about how you can tweak colors in a cover to have a different effect.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that idea that if things are really more cozy, maybe you take the guy with a gun and the dame sitting on the desk off your cover and you replace it with
Yeah.
something a little bit
Yeah. A cat
more
sitting on the desk. Yeah. Or
gentle.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, the cat sitting on the desk.
If it's cozy.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I agree. And, in my consulting that I do, cover change, unless it's just a terrible cover change is always the last thing. I mean, changing colors on a cover is a lot less expensive than a whole new cover. So yeah, I'm all for doing the thing that costs the least amount of money, blurbs in particular. are that costs you nothing unless you're going to pay somebody to do it. And that can change the tone of a book and the tone and that the reader gets when they read the blur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have almost convinced myself that for the Ann Kinnear books, anyone who's is tired of me talking about the Ann Kinnear covers can fast forward for a minute. But I've almost convinced myself that rather than going for a full cover design, I'm going to
Yeah.
get the equivalent of the background of the print copy
Hmm.
and put all the text on it myself because I think I have a flair for the text, but also because especially for the ebook, so I would just
Hmm.
clip out like the
Yeah.
the right hand side of the
Yeah.
print cover for the cover of the ebook.
Yeah.
And I've done this once, and I can see doing this quite regularly that as I look at, my BookBub emails coming through, and they're
Hmm.
very clear trends. Like from month to month, you
Hmm.
can definitely see
Right.
what the trend is for the cover text.
Hmm.
And it would be quite easy and quite inexpensive to just maybe like once a year, once every other year, update the text to whatever
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
current thing is, at least for the ebook. And
Yeah.
that gives you a slightly different look, but still recognizable as the same book. Like
Hmm.
I think the images in my Ann Kinnear covers are really part of my brand, and
Right.
I'm loath to change them. But those
Right.
tweaks that you can make on your own to continue to comply with
Hmm.
the evolving standards
Hmm.
of the
Yeah.
brand that you want to ally yourself with.
Right. 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 I agree. I think anything you can do for the least amount of money and time, really, I
Yeah.
mean, is what I would start with. I always say that because time and money are precious commodities. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, you don't wanna be thrashing around too much with
Mm,
something like that if you're
mm,
investing both of those
no,
resources.
no. And if you realize that I'm not really branded very well, I mean, if people look at my books, they don't know exactly what it is, what they're getting. If I polled my readers and there's not a theme that runs through the things they say, then I probably need to, tighten up my branding or whatever. That's something that can be done over, months. I mean, it's not something that has to be done tomorrow. But I do think it's important that you start moving that direction because as the market gets more flooded, it's just better to be the one that stands out because of, let's say, your branding. As AI becomes more uh, prominent, then your branding as a person and with specific emotional things that you can give the reader, even if you're writing horror, you're going to give them an emotional experience. And if you can really bake that into your brand, then that's gonna help you to stand out against, books that may not be written by people. So, I think that's something to think about.
That point about leaning into being human is very important, and one
It is.
change I'm making on I had 2 thoughts about social media. One is that comment you had made about what are people saying about your books. A private group, like a private Facebook group, can be a
Mhm.
great way to gather that kind of marketing information because
Yeah.
periodically I'll post a question in my Matty Dalrymple Readers Group private Facebook group that says, if someone said that they liked this Ann Kinnear
Mhm.
book or this Lizzy
Mhm.
Ballard book, one of my books, what's another book you would say, oh, if you like
Mhm.
that, you'll like this, because it's a great
Mhm.
way to get comp information. But doing it in a private group is nice because if everybody says, oh, Agatha Christie,
Mm.
and you don't want to go that direction, you don't want a
Yeah.
bunch of that on your
Yeah.
Facebook feed. And then the other thing I was thinking, just apropos of your comment with regard to being an actual person, is I'm starting to back away from just sharing things that I think are cute. Like for a period of time, my Facebook feed was all just me sharing cute dog videos. And I
Yeah.
thought,
Yeah.
it's going to be better. They're going to have a better sense of me if I'm posting
Mhm.
my own,
Mhm.
pictures of my own
Yes.
dogs. There's a
Yes.
concept, or here's a picture where I'm going on a walk. And so
Yeah.
you can build your brand by allowing people to see that human side of you
Mhm.
to the extent you're comfortable.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say authenticity, but it doesn't have to mean that you're sharing all your personal business.
Yeah.
I mean, I am an oversharer from way back, that is sort of my brand. And so for me, I'm okay with that. But there are people that don't want to share their personal stuff. But if you have a brand and you have a persona connected to that brand, then you be as authentic as you can be to that brand and that persona. It doesn't have to be you. It just has to be your forward-facing self with your
Yeah,
readers.
that's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that helps too. It's kind of fun to think about. It's a performance in a way,
It is a
and
performance in
not
some
in an
way.
inauthentic way, but
No, not
exactly
at
as you're
all.
saying. Yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, for introverts that don't like, they don't want to share. I mean, I'm not saying only introverts don't want to share their personal stuff, but I mean, if for some introverts that I know, it's really nerve wracking to go onto Facebook, even chatting with people in a group. But if you're going on as your author self as opposed to your real self, then it's different. It's a
yeah,
different sort of thing. You are not tricking them. You are not being inauthentic. You have just created a persona that writes these books that's the person that relates to your readers.
yeah. I really like this idea of aligning persona with brand.
Mhm.
I think that can
Mhm.
be really useful to people in the same way that people sometimes feel uncomfortable promoting themselves, and you have to
Mhm.
say you have to put on your promoter hat
Yeah.
and not your writer hat when you're
Not
doing
your
this.
rudder hat. Yeah.
This is your branding hat is your
Yeah.
persona. I really like that.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it does the groups you I'm trying not to draw a weird comparison to cliques in high school, but the
Yeah.
group you associate yourself with matters. And
Mhm.
one of the reasons that I had not really delved into doing cross promos and email
Mm.
is that I'm afraid of I'm afraid of representing it of recommending a book I don't like to my
Right.
readers or, now feeling committed to recommend a
Mhm.
book that it turns out I don't like. Do you do cross promotions in
I
emails or other
do.
forums? Can
I
you talk
do.
about that a little bit and how that ties in with branding?
Yes. So, from the beginning of I mean, when I was starting and I had an email list before my first book came out. So, I was sending emails out 6 weeks before, I started sending them out. And that I don't think I had other books in my newsletter until after my first book came out. And then I have something called J. Albright Spotlight in my newsletter. I don't read these. I mean, some of the books I've read, some I haven't. And my readers know that that's a thing. That's just a thing because I don't publish very often, but I do want to give them the opportunity to read other books and other authors. They're usually authors I know, and they're usually in KU. So if they get it and don't like it,
Yeah. Mhm.
it's pretty low risk.
Yeah.
But I do make sure that they are books like the books that my readers would like, in that the rom-coms or light romance or something like that. Every once in a while, I have put a darker romance in, but I do have readers who like that. So, if I look at the downloads, they've downloaded that as much as they have something else. So over time, I've just learned that about my readers. But as far as branding goes, I do try to keep it on brand for what my readers like about my books. If I look
Yeah.
because I will look at the books and I do, look at the reviews and what's said about them and stuff. Also, part of my brand is that kind of sharing, and I mean, I've offered my art team to several people who write what I write that are new. I mean, I'm a helper. I'm a 2 on the Enneagram. I mean, that's just who I am. And so I like to help people and I like to share things and stuff. And so that is on brand for me to share other people's books. It just is. And actually, for a year, I think it was during the pandemic, on the 2 weeks that I didn't send out my newsletter, I sent out a newsletter that was an author discovery newsletter. And so anyone who had a newsletter of less than, I think it was 1,500 people, I sent their book out to my readers. And I made it very clear. I have not read these books. Some of the authors I don't know, but you know, if you want to take a chance and you might find your next favorite reader. But I was just giving the authors the opportunity to get in front of a larger audience. I have my newsletters around 25,000 people. So, I mean, it was an opportunity to do that. My readers loved it. Now, if like on the form that the authors had to fill out, if they didn't have professional editing or a professional cover, I did not feature them because, you know, we do have some standards, there.
Yeah.
But if they did, and the reviews didn't say things like this author could have used an editor or something like that, then we would put them out. And my readers just ate it up. The downloads on those were so high. And the authors were thrilled because some of them hadn't sold any books. And then they get this bump and they were able to move some books. And so that was exciting for them. And I got emails from my readers saying that they had found an author that they wanted to read more of. So but that is my brand. I mean, that is who I am. Nobody else needs to do that or even wants to do that, probably. But for me, I just felt like it's so hard to get email followers, newsletter subscribers, that it would be great to give people the opportunity to do that. That is just how my mind thinks. It's not because I'm this huge altruistic person. And I'm just constantly thinking about how I can help other people because that's who I am, and I overhelp. I'm aggressively helper. I'm an aggressive helper sometime, and my daughter does not appreciate it. So, I mean, it's good and bad, but that is part of my brand. So for me, it was no big deal to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lesson to be drawn, even for people who don't have tens of thousands of people on their email list, which is that if you said your readers really appreciated getting that
They did.
information about the other authors. And I think that even if someone is just starting out, they're just starting out their email list, but they like this idea of demonstrating their helping,
Yeah.
their helping tendencies. Maybe an alternative is including your newsletter a review of a book that you read and enjoyed that you think your readers will also
Absolutely.
enjoy, because you can
Absolutely.
start developing that. It's not like you're necessarily helping out the person. Maybe it's a big name person and they're never going to notice the blip on the radar that your email will produce, but that establishing that kind of persona early on can pave the way for exactly the kind of
Yeah.
relationship that you're describing you have with your email list.
And it just creates goodwill because that big name person will probably never know, but your readers know. I
Yeah.
mean, they just know that about you. And I think that can become part of your brand and who you are as an author and as a person.
Just a quick break from the interview. Are you getting value from the podcast? Please consider supporting it and all the work I do at the Indie Author by becoming a patron. To pledge a monthly contribution, go to patreon.com/the Indie Author, or to make an occasional contribution, perhaps to indicate the value that a specific episode or resource provided to you on your creative voyage, scroll to the bottom of any page at theindieauthor.com and click Buy Me a Coffee. And now, back to the interview. I think the message that everything is branding it's both kind of scary, but it's also super helpful, because I do think that sometimes people think of branding as, the color of my website or whatever. But
Or the theme that runs through each cover, there's a ribbon that runs on it every cover. There's more than that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not limited to just blurbs and taglines, but I did how you use branding in blurbs and taglines is one of the topics that we wanted to hit. So we've talked very generally about the persona you put out there, but this idea of how you implement this in blurbs and taglines, I thought was very appealing. How do you recommend doing that?
Well, I've been finding some people use trope, which I think is great. I use tropes too, but finding that better, as Theodore talks about, that thing that is going to make anybody reading is going to just go and stop and go, whoa, what did she just say? And I suggest putting it bolded at the top of your blurb, because a lot of people are not reading below the fold. They are not expanding that blurb out because there are just too many. There are just too many. Plus, if you've been able to boil down your book and the good stuff in your book into 2 or 3 sentences that, can fit right there, you can use that everywhere. When you do a promo on one of the Free Booksy or Bargain Booksy, you can use that there. You can put it on your ads. You can put it in other people's newsletter. I mean, you can use that, and it is powerful. It can be really powerful to be able to just use that tagline that is kind of encapsulates the whole book. And by association encapsulates you as an author, then you can use that. And people remember that. People will remember those things, especially if you're putting it out there enough. They will see
Yeah.
that and they'll remember that.
Yeah, the taglines I've been using for my series, including my ads, are
Mhm.
for the Lizzy Ballard Thrillers, it's what happens when an extraordinary ability transforms an ordinary life. And
Mhm.
for the Ann Kinnear books, it's they say that dead men tell no tales. They don't
Mhm.
know Ann Kinnear.
Ah,
And
I love that.
yeah, I like those because I feel like it gets to the heart of, what the
Mhm.
themes of the books are,
Mhm.
and yet
Mhm.
it's both a blessing and a curse that it doesn't clearly align it with a particular genre, and I do
Right.
feel like that this is another one. Okay, fast forward if you're tired of hearing me say this, but especially with my Ann books, I feel like if I just decided to go whole hog into supernatural suspense,
Mhm.
100% and had the cover that had the, crystal ball with the hands around it on the
Yeah.
front, I might have sold more books, but it's not really the book I was want to be writing.
Right, right.
So I feel in a way I'm sacrificing some breadth to not pursue that, but I think that the fans I get, like I often get the comments that I like this because it was different than these other books for these reasons. And I'd
Mm.
almost, it's a business decision as well as a creative decision to
Right.
say,
Sure.
do you go for the bigger pool of readers or do you go for the deeper pool of readers? I think that
Mhm.
that then when you hook someone, you've hooked them big
Right.
because you're offering something that isn't completely compliant with the more obvious tropes.
Right. Right. I agree. In my Homecoming King book, the tagline for that is I did her wrong in high school. Now she's living in my pool house. What the hell could go wrong? And then the blurb is underneath that. But, really, the what the hell could go wrong is not even necessary, particularly, except I needed it for the lyrical part of it. But just, I did her wrong in high school. Now she's living in my pool house. That's built in conflict. That is for some people who like that kind of conflict. That is like, icing on the top. They just want to dive into that. So if you can find those things that really grab a reader and boil it down, and sometimes you can't do that by yourself. Sometimes you need help. Sometimes you need to brainstorm. And I love brainstorming. It's one of my favorite things in the world because I can say something not great, but somebody can take a tiny bit of that not great thing I said and make it greater. And then the next person can make it greater. And it's just better and better the more you talk about it. And so I think that's a great way to come up with taglines and even your branding, and your, any kind of tagline you're going to use for your author brand or anything like that to brainstorm or to use chat GPT and put in this is a good way, ethical way to use the AI is that you can, just put in words that you think maybe define your writing and stuff and ask them to give you a list of 20 other words. And some of them may be not great, but there may be one or two that you can take and expand on and come up with something that really does hit the mark for you and your books. And I also think making a list of, you know, sayings, things that might be a brand, make a list of 20. The first 15 are probably gonna be just cliche and not great, but those that last 5 might be awesome. So, because it makes you think, it makes you dig in, and we're authors, we're creatives. We can come up with catchy little things to say, that aren't cliche.
Yeah, I can attest to the importance of sort of market testing because the first version of the Lizzy Ballard tagline was, "What happens when an extraordinary power transforms an ordinary life?" And it quickly became clear that people thought I was writing like Christian fiction.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
I was like,
yeah.
"Oh, yeah, that's not the impression I want to be
Exactly,
leaving."
yeah,
So I changed power to
yeah,
ability because it
yeah.
felt like less of a kind of religious connotation there. But
I
uh,
agree, I agree. And I think that's what's so important and for everybody to remember is that it's not a one and done thing. We're constantly evolving as authors. We're constantly evolving in our writing and we can constantly be evolving in our brand. Our brand, we can just get better and better at it as we go along because we have more feedback. We have more people we can poll or talk to, or we know ourselves better. And I just think, you know, just starting the journey is what's important. It's not where you finish because until we stop, we're not really finished.
And I think it's also important, generally to make changes gradually. And I was thinking of this in terms of if you feel like you have to change. And one of the things we talked about was how comfortable people feel sharing
Mm,
personal things. And I can imagine someone says, yeah, I'm going to be the kind of sharing person who, talks about personal topics or
mhm,
shares stories about my family. And then
mhm.
for whatever reason, you decide you want to back off that. And
Yeah.
you don't want to kind of sully your brand by making some statement. Like what I'm thinking of is all the people who say, that's it, I'm off
Uh,
social media now. And then a week later, they're back on. And it
they're
just looks
back. Yeah.
goofy because, they're always back and forth. But that if you decide you've made a decision that you don't want to stick with, like sharing,
Mhm,
just pull
mhm.
back from it. There's no need to
Yeah.
like announce it to
Yeah.
people that you're
There's
changing
not.
because
Yeah.
over time it will become clear. And the people who are there because they wanted to know about your family life will gradually drop off. And the
Mm,
people maybe were made uncomfortable by that level of
mhm,
sharing
mhm,
will filter in, but, like,
mhm.
tweaking the dials delicately is a piece of
Yes,
advice I would offer.
that is so smart. And, I mean, depending on your brand, like my brand is sexy, swoony, pee your pants funny. You are never going to see me in a political conversation online.
Yeah,
Never,
yeah,
never, never. I mean, there are one or two instances where I've shared, because of my family and the family I have and my granddaughters and stuff like that, that I have made statements. Actually, it happened before George Floyd. My granddaughters are Black. And so there was an incident that happened when we were all together. And I was like, come on, y'all. We got to be better than this. But that was before George Floyd. Not that I wouldn't say it. I'm not a coward, but there are places to say things and there are places not to say things. For my brand, my Jami Albright brand is not where I would necessarily get into a discussion about that. That's just the
yeah.
decision I've made. You can make a different decision and that's fine. But for me, that is the decision I've made that I'm not going to really necessarily publicly address controversial things. I mean, privately, and if someone did something or said something, I would go to that person, but I'm not going to publicly do stuff like that because I just don't think that's necessarily what my readers are looking for.
Yeah, I think that's one of the benefits of having a separate personal page from your
Yeah,
public facing pages, a public private
yeah,
profile, for example.
right.
And I also think it's a good people can think of curating their social media feeds as a form of branding as well, because
Mhm, mhm.
I remember when I first started getting traction on Facebook, let's say, and 99.9% of the comments were great, but every once in a while there would be a weird one. And for a while I had this dilemma about what should I do with that? Is it ethical for me to remove it? I'm like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
perfectly ethical because it's the community I'm
Yeah,
building, and I don't
yeah.
want some weirdo showing up in the community and,
Mm-mm.
if I have a party and some stranger walks in and starts saying inappropriate things to people, I'm gonna kick kick them out. And so
Exactly.
curating that, you're creating the community you wanna
Mhm,
see, and you're doing that
mhm.
not only for yourself, but for the other people who wanna share that
Right,
community with you.
right. Exactly, exactly. I
So
love
cool.
that. Yeah,
Well, I mean, your conversation about, everything you do really being part of branding and the idea of
yeah.
having the persona that is what you brand with, is brilliant. And so thank you so much, Jamie. This has been such
You're
a fun
welcome.
conversation.
You're
And please
welcome.
let everyone know where they can go if they would like to hear more from you
Sure.
about branding and many other topics.
Sure. You can go to the Wish I'd Known Then for Writers podcast, and that's where Sarah and I do a lot of our discussion on things like this. Um, my website, jamialbright.com. I also do author consulting. And if you are interested in that, it's jamialbright.com/author services. And yeah, my books are on Amazon. So I'm in KU. So that's where I'm at.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.